Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today we're headed to New England and the granite state of New Hampshire, where, in the summer of 1862, a new regiment, the 12th Infantry, formed in response to President Abraham Lincoln's call for 300,000 volunteers to serve 3 years or the war to put down the rebellion that divided our country. The 12th New Hampshire Infantry happened to be known as the New Hampshire Mountaineers for the large number of tough, rugged backwoodsmen in its ranks. The historian of the 12th, Asa Bartlett, a captain in the regiment, explained it in his 1897 book titled History of the 12th Regiment of New Hampshire Volunteers in the War of the Rebellion. Here's what Bartlett had to say. Quote, Washington brought from chaos the first successful republic, but oppressors had prostituted and were then seeking to destroy it. But the mission of Lincoln was to restore it to its primitive purity and make it conform to the Declaration of Independence. He had no doubt of the final result. Speeches by prominent leaders and others that followed were all noble and patriotic appeals to manhood, honor, and duty, and added new fuel to the flame already kindled. Such were the tocsin notes sounded along the shores of the Winnipesaukee, echoing and re-echoing amid the surrounding hills and mountains, and reverberating up and down the valleys of her contributory streams that called together, as if by almost magic power, 1,000 stalwart youth and hardy mountaineers so quickly for the camp as to hardly be equaled in the whole history of the war. That's Bartlett's take on the origins of the 12th. But not all these patriotic woodsmen were big and burly lumberjacks. Well, one of them, in fact, was quite the opposite. He's pictured here, and his name was Frederick S. Morse. Boyish looking and all of 17 years old when he enlisted in Company F. The historian says, quote, he was selected as a marker early in the service, carrying a small flag instead of a gun, end quote. While he was on drills and other parade exercises, he played his part to keep all the rest of the men, the big burly guys, in order. Never joining the line of battle, the jolly-hearted teenager became an orderly to the regiment's colonel, George W. Stevens, and proved quite the trickster. One veteran remembered how he, quote, always greeted you with a roguish grin, suggestive of a joke or a prank that was pretty sure to follow, and then he would run away with an explosive laugh that would sound something like the bursting of a cohorn mortar shell, end quote. The same soldier recalled how Morse begged to fire a shot at the rebels from the trenches of Petersburg during that grueling summer of 1864. This anecdote, titled A Right-Eyed Squint, also appears in Captain Bartlett's regimental history. It's worth a read. So let me share with you the relevant passage about Morse and his experience at Petersburg. Here we go. Quote, who is there much better remembered by the surviving members of Company F than the jolly-hearted youth, scarcely halfway through his teens, who used to act as a marker at Falmouth in the formation and evolution of the regimental line on parade and drill? He was too full of frolic and fun to ever have a sober face, unless when sleeping, but always greeted you with a roguish grin, suggestive of the joke or prank that was pretty sure to follow, and then he would run away with an explosive laugh that would sound something like the bursting of a cohorn mortar shell. That's the part that I shared with you early on, and this is in context from the anecdote. That anecdote continues. Notwithstanding his years, he never cried baby, but with good pluck and luck was always present or accounted for until the end of the war. One day, during the siege of Petersburg in the summer of '64, while some of the best marksmen of the regiment were exchanging shots with the rebel sharpshooters, our young friend, wanting to give them a right-eyed squint himself, begged the privilege of doing so of one of his company, who had been, for some time, busy swapping minis with a keen-sighted Johnny through nearly opposite portholes. With a caution to keep his eye peeled, the rifle is loaded and given to him. With a contemptuous nonchalance, he thrusts the barrel through the hole in the earthworks, draws back the hammer, and puts his cheek to the stock for a death-aiming sight. But the swift lead messenger was coming at him instead of going, and before the hammer fell upon the cap of his gun tube, it went whizzing into broken pieces through the cap upon his head, while splinters of stock and lock played tear and scare with his face and hair. For once, Fred, there you've got his name at last, looked sober, and though the boys used to laugh at and joke him a good deal about getting instead of keeping his eye peeled, and of its being a case of jump instead of love at first sight, etc., it was some time before he could more than half appreciate it all, because he couldn't see it with only one eye. So there you have that anecdote where young Fred gets that chance to take a fun pot shot at a Confederate sharpshooter on the other side of the earthworks somewhere in front of Petersburg. And just as he's getting ready to pull the trigger, boom, a bullet from one of the rebel sharpshooters hits his gun, exploding in pieces and sending fragments all over the place. Now, though it sobered him for a moment, the fun-loving Morse wasn't sober for long. He continued his prankster ways until he mustered out with the regiment with his surviving comrades. That was in June of 1865. Morse eventually made his way to Massachusetts, where he married and worked as a painter for a carriage manufacturer and later an ice cream company. He was active in the Grand Army of the Republic, that veterans organization that was so well known across the Union, until his death in 1911 at age 65. There's a note in his obituary that observes that he was well known in town, which I think is suggestive, at least evidence, that he was a character throughout his entire life. So thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.